Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Powerful on Purpose, the author journey. I'm Leslie Caputo, your host, the founder of Author in 30, where we help experts organize and pull out clarity in their own story and messaging so they can take all the content that you already have and turn that into a great book. I'm passionate about authors and helping authors, so I'm super excited. This show is really about how do we look at the inner workings of how authors wrote books, what they're doing with them now, marketing, a whole gamut of authorship. So I'm super excited to share today's guest because I've gotten to know her in the author lab and a phenomenal woman. Let me just say that. So here we go. Yvonne Caputo has been a teacher. She taught in public schools for 18 years. Kudos to her. She has also been the vice president of human resources at a retirement community, a corporate trainer, and a consultant and a psychotherapist. She has a master's degree in education and clinical psychology. Her book, Flying with Dad, is about a relationship with her father as he tells World War II stories. Her second book, Dying with Dad, shares how she and her dad had tough conversations about what he wanted in the end. She has always been a storyteller, and she has used stories to widen students' eyes and soften clients' pain, and her stories have earned her rave review as a presenter and speaker. So welcome, Yvonne.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Yeah. So I always start with what's the story? Because I know you have a very powerful one that led you to write your first book.
In 2008, on a very cold, dark January night, I was on my weekly phone call with my father, and he lived on the other side of the Pennsylvania. So generally what we would talk about is dialysis treatments and the in-home care we had for him and getting groceries and those kinds of things. And after all of that was done, Dad and I would stall in terms of what we were going to discuss because I'm not a sports fan. So I don't know from football. I don't know from, baseball. But on that January night, he told this quirky, funny, off-the-wall story of all things about making an emergency landing in a B-24 in freed Belgium toward the end of the war. And he was doing this, and I said, Dad, let me get a pencil and paper. Exactly what he said to me. What the hell do you want to do that for? And I said, this is good stuff. And I said, this is something I'd like to share with the family. So he went on with that story, and I don't know what possessed me, but on the next phone call, I said, if you're willing, start at the beginning. And he did. And story after story after story came rolling off his tongue, ones I'd never heard before. And somewhere along the line, they were so unique, I thought, I think I have the material for a book. So on and on we went. And I really did. I really had a whole manuscript. Then came, what am I going to do with it? And I'm really very clear and upfront. I know when I don't know. And I'm not resisting to saying I know when I don't know. So I gave the manuscript to somebody to proofread. And then I asked, what does it need? And this was interesting. She said, there's no clear going from paragraph to paragraph. You don't set paragraphs up. They just kind of pop in. Okay, so I rewrote. And then I started looking for other professionals. And one of the persons said to me, where are you in this book? I said, I'm not in it. It's not about me. It's about my dad. Well, you need to think about being in it. And I remember clearly he suggested that I read Tuesdays with Morrie. And I did. And it set me up to show that there was this ongoing story between Morrie and his professor. So I rewrote it. And then I thought, I could be on the other side of the grass before I ever find a traditional publisher. But again, knowing what I don't know, the first book I picked up was the legal side of self-publishing, because I did not want to get myself into some kind of lawsuit. Once that was done, I formed a company, and I read another book, and it was on self-publishing. And on the back of that book were the names of companies. And they were very clear. Stay away from so-and-so. Stay away from so-and-so. And these are reputable people. Well, what I wanted is I didn't want a cover artist. and then find a proofreader and then find a developmental. I didn't want to do that. I wanted one stop. So I lined up 4 people and interviewed them. And that's how I found my publisher. And what she did is she took my book and threw it in a blender and tossed it back to me and said, "This is what I think you need to do with it." Well, what she saw in my book was not anything that I had seen at all. And so the 4th rewrite became Flying with Dad.
Cool. Well, that's quite a journey and dedication to getting it out in the world.
It was that first story that did it. I'm a history buff. So I've read about World War II. I know about Eisenhower. I know about D-Day. I know about those kinds of things. But what I had never read was the story of an individual soldier in the way that my father was telling these stories. Can I give an example?
Absolutely.
Okay. So he's at Miami Beach for basic training, considered the best boot camp in the United States. And they're out in the morning doing calisthenics on the beach. And Dad realizes he has to go. So he goes over to the slit trench and he falls in. He's so dehydrated from diarrhea. All right. Whoever was around picked Dad up, threw him in the ocean to clean him off before they took him to the base hospital. And then here was the kicker, besides falling in. They treated him with arsenic. And I said, "No way." And he said, "Yes." So I researched, and absolutely, he was in basic training in 1943, and penicillin had been discovered by British scientists. But given where Britain was, there was no money to find a way to mass produce it. It was extremely expensive. So the British scientists came to the United States, and by 1945, penicillin was available at a very low cost. So my dad's story about, now I'm blocking, but anyway, about that poison was true. And I asked him, I said, "Well, what did they do?" He said, "They just gave me little bits of it, just enough to kill the microbe that was causing my problem." So those are the kinds of things he told me. And that's not something that I would have normally read.
Right? Absolutely not.
And I really felt that those kinds of stories would attract an audience. So that's pretty much, how it began to develop.
Right. I love that. And then it also, I know because we've talked about this, created a different relationship with your dad, right? This, you becoming an author and him really becoming an author as well through you.
It did. Somewhere, I think about the 4th chapter, Dad was he was at Miami Beach. They were billeted in hotels and stripped down. These were not, pleasure trips. And I said to him, I said, "Well, what was the name of the hotel you were at?" And he said, "I don't remember." I said, "Well, where was it located?" And he gave me the coordinates. And I Googled, because you can Google anything. And I sent him a picture and the address. And I said, "Is this the hotel?" "No, that's not it. No, that's not it. No, that's not it." On the 4th try, Dad said, "That's it. We were there as cadets. Great work. Love you, Dad." So the more we worked together, the more he began to trust me. And toward the end of all the interviews, he trusted me with the nightmares that he came home with, a flashback that he had. And because I'm a psychotherapist, I could say, "Well, Dad, your nightmares were normal." "What the hell do you mean?" So I was able to explain to him the neurobiology, all of which was not known in 1945 when he came home. So I said to him, "Tell me about the nightmare." And he said, "Our plane was going down. There was a place for me to jump out. I couldn't get there." He said, "I was in a tunnel and I had to scrape my way back. And because it was stainless steel, I couldn't get purchase." And Mom would wake him up because he was screaming. She would say, "What is it, Mike?" And he'd say, "Oh, it's nothing." He dug channels in the mattress because he was trying to get out of that plane. So again, I explained what and why he was having those specific nightmares. They lasted for 3 years. And I said, "Well, tell me about the other guys." And he said, "I'd see them on the street and they looked fine. And they didn't say anything about nightmares or any of that kind of stuff." So he said, "I thought there was something wrong with me." And I said, they probably had them too. But what you didn't do was you didn't talk about it. So you didn't know, because the thinking at the time was tough it up.
Which I will say to a certain extent is still true, right? We still hang on to that. We got to be strong. and tough, and yeah.
You'll get through this. So what happened when I was talking to him is I literally could hear my father's shoulders drop. 60 years after the fact, he finds out that there wasn't anything wrong with him, that he was having a normal reaction to the extreme abnormality of what he witnessed during the war. So that's as we walked this path, that's what happened. And because I worked in a retirement community, I also knew how bad it could be if Dad didn't have an advance directive. So I went home, we got one done. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, I was able to look at the 5 wishes, which is an incredible document. And it's so much more than an advance directive, because I asked Dad, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your children to know? Do you want to be buried or cremated? What kind of a funeral do you want? I mean, just question after question after question, so that when the time came, I was able to speak for my dad and say, he doesn't want to be revived. And I called the emergency room, and the emergency room doctor called the EMTs and said, you can stop working on him. And my father's wish was very clear. He wanted to be carried feet first out of his own home. That meant his body was on the gurney, and that's what happened. And the EMTs set the gurney down behind the ambulance, and the doors were open, and they were taking Dad into the hospital to be pronounced and then to be transferred to a funeral home. And the light was shining on Dad's face, and there was this soft, sweet smile. And I went, yes! I wish you could have seen the EMT's faces. Like, who is this woman? Has she lost any marbles she might have had? And then I just turned to him and I said, his wish was feet first out of his home. And you did it. And that smile told me everything I needed to know. And what came over me was this profound, sacred joy. Here my dad has just died, and I'm feeling this joy, and the joy was because he trusted me. Intimately, he trusted me to do what he asked. So my passion around the second book, Dying with Dad, is for people to be more at ease talking about death and dying, to do those legal documents called advance directives, to look into a document called the 5 wishes. And after my brother read the book, he said, when should I do this? And I said, now, because you don't know. From one day to the next, you really don't know. So the chaos I saw in the retirement community when these kinds of documents were not done was something that my family avoided. When we were sitting with the priest planning the funeral, I said, Dad wants this, 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 this. It was all done. So that's the kind of connection that Dad and I got to.
Right. Which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't begin to say how deeply it's affected me, because for your audience, Dad and I were distant. When I was growing up, I wanted a dad that he didn't know how to be. But through the writing of the book, through his opening up, that trust, that intimacy developed, and I was able to do what he asked me to do based on that intimacy.
Right. And you were, like I've mentioned this already, but you were very persistent, right? And knew the power that this book could have. So maybe this really isn't a question, but what do you see as you look back on that whole process of writing, publishing, everything? What was the biggest challenge that you faced, or where you had a moment where you thought, I don't know?
I think there was a little bit of that all the way through. I'd never published before. I mean, my writing was college papers. Those aren't books. And again, having been a teacher, I would have students come up to me and say, Miss Caputo, how does this work? And my answer would be, I don't know, but let's find out. So I had become comfortable with this, I don't know. So that gave me the initiative to reach out to people who did know.
And that's a great lesson in itself, right? To reach out and be committed to maybe not taking the first person, right? Really looking for that person you feel comfortable with, that you trust, that you think, okay, this person gets me, gets my book.
Exactly. And as a psychotherapist, I had something that I would know. When I interviewed people, how did they respond to me? What was their tone of voice? What kind of advice did they give me? How did they give me that advice? I really was keyed in on the personality of the people that I was talking to. And I knew by the way that I was treated that this was the person.
And that brings out something that I think is really important that we don't talk about enough about books. Because I think books are a whole bunch of little tiny decisions, right? And if we don't make one, they start to pile up and you get down the road and now you have a whole bunch of decisions you don't know where to go with.
Mm-hmm.
But also this idea of trusting ourselves at every step of the way, that one, my voice is important, it needs to be heard, but then all those other decisions, right? Because that's really what I heard in you talking about was I trusted myself to make the decision that was right for me in this case.
Mm-hmm. And the advantage I also had was my age. I wasn't 21 when I was doing this. I really am delighted that it happened later on in life where I wasn't so hesitant to say, I don't know.
Sure. Yes. Probably some of that does come with age, right?
So if one of your listeners is young, then the message I want them to have is it's okay not to know. You know, there are vast resources out there to help you get to the goal. Even in the editing process, the lines came back red and there were different sentence structures. And I said, I'm proof. So what we agreed to do is that she would edit, she would send it back to me. If I liked what she did, I was game. If I didn't like what she did, then we worked at it. It was a back and forth. So that was really helpful. You have to have a certain amount of ego to write a book. You gotta have this thing inside you that says, I know this subject. I know that there's an audience out there. I know that I can do this. The other part of that is to let the ego go when you can say, I don't know about a proofreader. I don't know about how to make a cover. I don't know that kind of thing, but I know enough to find the person that's going to help me through that process.
Yeah. So interesting because I've not thought about it in the ego sense, but you're right. You have to be confident that you have enough content. And I always say, don't be wedded to the words, right? Because I see a lot of authors, we get really wedded to our words when the message and the intent are so much more important. And if someone can say, ooh, if you reworded it like this. So I think there's that openness too, to being okay with some changes as long as we're really clear and confident in our intent and message.
Exactly. So what was suggested in terms of that last rewrite was something I hadn't seen in the book. And here was this outsider who read it and saw something clearly. So the suggestions that she made, when I opened the box and got the author's proof and I'm holding it in my hands, I'm going like, wow, this is something good. This is something worthy. I'm really proud of what's happened.
Yes, I love that. I almost love when it says author copy or proof not for sale or whatever it is. I love those more, right? Yeah, I'm goofy like that, people. So, but I agree. There is something really special about seeing your message on paper. And I think it's because we own it, right? We can say stuff all day long, but when it's on paper, like it is.
Yeah, there's when the book came out and when I did author events and stuff like that, to have people in the audience say to me, I saw myself all the way through the book.
Cool. Right.
Or there was an author event that I did. There were 3 young women, probably 20s, late 20s, early 30s, in and amongst all of these older folks. And they said nothing. And as a former teacher, I'm not going to let that happen. So I called on one young lady and I said, let me know what you think. And she said, I'm so into World War II. She said, I just couldn't believe the individual stories that you had about your dad. They just gave me a total different perspective. The second young woman said, I saw myself and my dad, and we are very close. And she said, I'm so grateful to have that relationship with my dad. The third young woman said, I don't have a good relationship with my dad, but your book makes me want to have one. And so now Dad and I are doing things together that we haven't done before. Now, that's the gift.
Absolutely. That is a huge gift. That's right. And that's what you want your book to go out in the world and do. Yes, kudos. Well, as we wrap up, are you thinking about a third book?
I have one under my hat, yes.
Okay. I figured. We're all anxiously waiting that one too, right?
Thank you.
And any last words to aspiring authors?
Whatever is keeping you from believing in yourself, whatever's keeping you from that piece, find a way to get around it. Find a way to put it in its place. Find a way where you know that you've got something really important to say. And then little by little, just keep on writing.
Love that. Great advice, folks. Well, this has been a delight and a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been great. Thank you, too.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody else, be sure and subscribe because you don't want to miss really fascinating stories as we talk to authors about what it's like, what has done for their lives, for their relationships. It really is a game-changing thing for your life and potentially your business as well. So be sure and subscribe.